What is up, you guys? I feel very quiet because I was just in the library and I got my quiet voice on because I don't want to interrupt anyone. But I'm wearing my hat again. This is a hat I got back in the day in Reno, and yeah, it's a special hat to me, but I wore it through some tumultuous times in my life. And I just got it out of my dad's attic. I got a whole bunch of hats from up there. But anyway, I want to read to you guys, and I'm going to put this window down anyway because I need some fresh air rolling through here for sure. My car is right in the sun, and it's nice, but we can't be sitting here sweating to death, you know? So hopefully we get a little bit of a breeze going through here. The air feels great outside. So we're gonna do a little history reading today. Get back into it here. Basically, I haven't read history to you guys in a while, so we're getting up to the point of the War of 1812. Thomas Jefferson was president after John Adams. George Washington served 2 terms. John Adams served 1 term. Thomas Jefferson served, and then he served again and left the country in shambles, basically. But during Thomas Jefferson's presidency, he expanded the United States massively. Massive expansion. Yes, massive expansion. The size of the United States nearly doubled under Thomas Jefferson. Lewis and Clark went on their expedition and explored the country, and they went all the way up to the Pacific Northwest, exploring all the different territories and stuff. And then after Thomas Jefferson, we got James Madison. And I have liked James Madison so far from what I've learned about him, but he, according to my history book, he was not really a great president, because he just wasn't he was good at persuading people, he wasn't good at commanding people. Anyway, so we're reading a little bit here, and it's gonna get into the war a little bit more, I guess, but the United States has declared war against Britain because Britain has been ridiculous. They have been attacking American ships. They have been boarding them and kidnapping, abducting American sailors from their ships, and they also destroyed the Chesapeake, which was an American ship. They attacked them and killed many people, and so anyway, America's just like, we ain't playing this anymore. We're going to war against you guys. And so far, it doesn't look like this is going to go in a very good direction so far. But anyway, we're going to pick it up. This section is called The Lust for Canada and Florida. Some Americans wanted war with Great Britain in 1812 because they sought to seize control of Canada. That there were nearly 8 million Americans and only 300,000 Canadians led many to believe that doing so would be quick and easy. Thomas Jefferson, for instance, wrote President Madison that the acquisition of Canada was simply a matter of marching north with a military force. So Thomas Jefferson has definitely been wrong about some stuff, and he's just not known what to do in certain situations. And Madison is kind of following in his footsteps a little bit, I'd say, unfortunately. The British were also vulnerable far to the south. East Florida, which had returned to Spain's control in 1783, posed a threat because Spain was too weak or too unwilling to prevent Indian attacks across the border with Georgia. So there's been a lot of problems with Indians attacking Americans because of the British. The British have been using the Indians to attack America. Yeah. In the absence of a strong Spanish presence, British agents and traders remained in East Florida, smuggling goods and conspiring with Indians against Americans. Spanish Florida had also long been a haven for freedom-seeking enslaved people who had managed to flee enslavement in Georgia and South Carolina. Many Americans living along the Florida-Georgia border hoped Florida-Georgia border hoped that war would enable them to oust both the British and the Spanish from Florida. War fever. In the Congress that assembled in late 1811, new anti-British representatives from southern and western districts shouted for war to defend national honor and rid the Northwest of the Indian problem by invading Canada. Among the most vocal war hawks were Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. I've heard that guy's name before. Had heard of both these dudes. Clay, the brash young Speaker of the House, was for resistance by the sword. He boasted that the Kentucky militia alone could conquer Canada. His bravado inspired others. "I don't like Henry Clay," Calhoun said. "He is a bad man, an impostor, a creator of wicked schemes. I wouldn't speak to him, but by God, I love him. For wanting war against Britain." When Calhoun learned that President Madison had finally decided on war, he threw his arms around Clay's neck and led his colleagues in a mock Indian war dance. In New England and much of New York, however, there was little enthusiasm for war. Great Britain remained those states' largest trading partner. The sentiment was that military conflict could cripple the region's shipping industry. Both Massachusetts and Connecticut refused to send soldiers to fight, and merchants only sold supplies to British troops in Canada. War preparations. All right, getting into it now. One thing was certain: the United States was woefully unprepared for war, both financially and militarily, and James Madison lacked the leadership ability and physical stature to inspire public confidence and military resolve. The national economy was weak too. In 1811, Republicans had let the charter of the Bank of the United States expire. Many Republican congressmen owned shares in state banks and wanted the Bank of the United States dissolved because it both competed with and regulated their local banks. Once the Bank of the United States shut down, the BUS or BUS shut down, however, the number of unregulated state banks mushroomed, all with their own forms of currency, creating commercial chaos. Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin was so upset by the loss of the Bank of the United States that he wrote a scathing letter of resignation. President Madison begged him to reconsider, which he did. President Madison begged him to reconsider, which he did, but the problems of waging a war with Britain without adequate financial resources did not go away. Once war began, it did not go well. The mighty British Navy blockaded American ports, which caused federal tariff revenues to tumble. In March 1813, Treasury Secretary Gallatin warned Madison that the United States had hardly enough money to last till the end of the month. Furthermore, Republicans in Congress were so afraid of public criticism that they delayed approving tax increases needed to finance the war. The military situation was almost as bad. In 1812, the British had 250,000 professional soldiers and the most powerful navy in the world. By contrast, the U.S. Army numbered only 3,287 ill-trained and poorly equipped men, led by mostly incompetent officers with little combat experience. So this is not looking good for America at all. In January 1812, Congress authorized an army of 35,000 men, but a year later, just 18,500 had been recruited. Many of them Irish-American immigrants who hated the English and were enticed to enlist by congressional promises of cash and land. President Madison, who refused to allow free blacks or enslaved people to serve in the army, had to plead with state governors to provide militiamen, only to have Federalist governors in anti-war New England decline. New England was against the war because that's where they're going to take such a heavy blow, the New England ports. They didn't want a war, you know? Okay, come on back, Colonel. The British, on the other hand, had thousands of soldiers stationed in Canada and the West Indies. And as was true during the Revolutionary War, the British recruited more Native American allies than did the Americans. The U.S. Navy was in better shape than the Army, with able officers and well-trained seamen, but it had only 16 tiny gunboats compared to Britain's 600 warships. 16 to 600. 16 tiny gunboats compared to 600 warships. It's not good, guys. It's not good. The lopsided military strength of the British led Madison to mutter that the United States was in an embarrassing situation. Yeah, I would agree, unfortunately. Continental War. A Continental War. For these reasons and more, the War of 1812 was one of the strangest conflicts in history. In fact, it was 3 wars fought on 3 fronts. One theater was the Chesapeake Bay, along the coast of Maryland and Virginia, including Washington, D.C. The second was in the South, Alabama, Mississippi, and West and East Florida, where American forces led by Andrew Jackson invaded lands owned by the Creeks and the Spanish. The third front might be more accurately called the Canadian-American War. It began in what is now northern Indiana and Ohio, southeastern Michigan, and the contested border regions around the Great Lakes. The fighting raged back and forth across the Canadian border as the United States repeatedly invaded British Canada, only to be repulsed. The war in the North. The War of 1812, often called America's Second War for Independence, was very much a civil war. Canadians, thousands of whom were former American loyalists who had fled north after the Revolutionary War, remained loyal to the British Empire, while the Americans and a few French Canadians and Irish Canadians sought to push Britain out of North America and annex Canada. In some cases, Americans fought former Americans, including families that were divided in their allegiances. Siblings shot each other. Once, after killing an American militiaman, a Canadian soldier began taking the clothes off the corpse, only to realize that it was his brother. He grumbled that it served him right to have died for a bad cause. Dang. Indians armed by the British dominated the borderlands around the Great Lakes. Michigan's governor recognized that the British and their Indian allies were dependent upon each other. The British cannot hold Upper Canada, Ontario, without the assistance of the Indians, but the Indians cannot conduct a war without the assistance of a civilized nation, Great Britain. So the American assault on Canada involved attacking Indians, Canadians, and British soldiers. Invading Canada. Okay, I think this is probably going to be our last section, maybe. We'll see. President Madison approved a 3-pronged plan for the invasion of British Canada. It called for one army to move north through upstate New York along Lake Champlain to take Montreal, while another was to advance into Upper Canada by crossing the Niagara River between Lakes Ontario and Erie. The third attack would come from the west, with an American force moving east into Upper Canada from Detroit, Michigan. The plan was to have all three attacks begin at the same time to force the British troops in Canada to split up. The complicated plan, however, was a disaster. The underfunded and undermanned Americans could barely field one army, much less three, and communication among the commanders was spotty at best. In July 1812, General William Hull, a Revolutionary War veteran and governor of the Michigan Territory, marched his ragtag army across the Detroit River into Canada. He told the Canadians that he had come to free them from British tyranny and oppression. The Canadians, however, did not want to be liberated, and the Americans were soon pushed back to Detroit by British troops. Canadian militiamen and their Indian allies. Hull was tricked by the British commander's threats. William Hull, okay. Hull was tricked by the British commander's threats to unleash thousands of Indian warriors. Fearing a massacre, Hull did the unthinkable. He surrendered his entire force of 2,500 troops without firing a shot. His capitulation shocked the nation and opened the western frontier to raids by British troops and their Canadian and Indian allies. President Madison and the Republicans felt humiliated. Yeah, I can understand. A Republican said General Hull must be a traitor or nearly an idiot or part of both. Hull was eventually tried and sentenced to death. Although pardoned by Madison, he was dismissed from the army for his cowardice. The second prong of the American plan, the assault on Montreal, never got off the ground. The third prong began at dawn on October 13th, my dad's birthday, 1812, when U.S. troops, led by General Stephen Van Rensselaer, rowed across the Niagara River from Lewiston, New York, to the Canadian village of Queenston, where they suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Queenston Heights. Almost 1,000 U.S. soldiers were forced to surrender. The losses in Canada led many Americans to lose hope. In early 1813, a Kentuckian warned that any more military disasters would result in disunion, and that the cause of republicanism will be lost. Then there was a glimmer of good news. In 1813, Americans led by General Zebulon Pike attacked York, later named Toronto, the provincial capital of Upper Canada. The British and Canadian militiamen surrendered, and over the next several days, in part because Pike had been killed, the U.S. soldiers rampaged out of control, plundering the city and burning government buildings. After the torching of York, the Americans sought to gain naval control of the Great Lakes and other inland waterways along the Canadian border. If they could break the British naval supply line and secure Lake Erie, they could divide the British from their Indian allies. In 1813, at Presque Isle, Pennsylvania, near Erie, 28-year-old Oliver Hazard Perry, the commander of U.S. forces, supervised the construction of warships from timber cut in nearby forests. By the end of the summer, these cars, everybody's coming to class right now. By the end of the summer, Commodore Perry's new warships set out in search of the British, finally finding them at Lake Erie's Put-in-Bay on September 10th. 2 British warships pounded the Lawrence, Perry's flagship. After 4 hours, none of Lawrence's guns... Oh my gosh. You gotta give me a break here. This is insane. I can't believe they actually published this in this history book, and it's so grammatically incorrect. This is what it says. I'm gonna read this to you. After 4 hours, none of the Lawrence's guns was working. None of the Lawrence's guns was working. It's not was working, it was were working. Give me a break. Guns was working. The guns wasn't working. No, the guns weren't working, you moron. After 4 hours, none of the Lawrence's guns were working. Most crew members were dead or wounded. Perry refused to quit, however. He switched to another vessel, kept fighting, and miraculously ended up accepting the surrender of the entire British squadron. Hatless and bloodied, Perry famously reported, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." It's awesome. American control. Here we go. One more. Come on now. Come on. Putt, putt, putt. Come on, putt, putt, putt. Come on. Come on, putt, putt. Come on, putt, putt, putt. Come on, putt, putt, putt. Stop smoking weed. Oh my gosh. American control of Lake Erie forced the British to evacuate Upper Canada. They gave up Detroit and were defeated at the Battle of the Thames in southern Canada on October 5th, 1813. During the battle, the British fled, leaving the great chief Tecumseh and 500 warriors to face the wrath of the Americans. When Tecumseh was killed and remaining Indians retreated, Perry's victory and the defeat of Tecumseh enabled the Americans to recover most of Michigan and seize the western district of Upper Canada. Thereafter, the war in the north lapsed into a military stalemate, and neither side able to dislodge the other. Tecumseh's legacy has lived on in the form of towns in 5 states named for him. So that's it for now, guys. Thanks for reading with me. Thanks for listening and standing by and watching. I appreciate it. I've got about 10 more pages in this chapter, thankfully and luckily, because I got a quiz tomorrow morning and I'm just trying to be done. I like this and it is enjoyable, but I am ready to be done. Ready to be done. It takes such a long time to read these pages sometimes. And part of the reason why I made this video is because I was in a dry spell and I was struggling to get this done, because I was just like, dude, I've been sitting here staring at this page for so long, man, I can't take it anymore. Gotta get out of here. Anyway, thank you for watching with me. Thanks for listening. History is super important, and I've learned so much from history. It's changed it has allowed me to look at the world differently, and it's allowed me to understand the world differently and to make a lot more sense of the world, which is an amazing thing. It is an amazing thing. So I'm super thankful. I'm super thankful to learn about our country, the history, and the rights and the wrongs, you know? And looking at the stuff that we went through back then makes me kind of sad about things now. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing, for better or for worse, all the things that have happened. But now more than ever, where so many people's eyes are on, where our public servants are in the public eye more now than ever, and we have the internet and we can look at people and we can, you know what I mean? Like our presidents are under the spotlight. It's so much different now, and it just amazes me that it saddens me that we don't have better candidates. It saddens me that America has become corrupt, because it has to some extent. I gotta get going. I'll be late to class. Oh, I am gonna be late to class. Oh, shucks.